Hello everybody. It's a great honor to be here. Can everybody hear me? Should I use the mic or you? It's okay. Okay. I mean, this is a great room. It's it's a pleasure to be in the university. I moved between academia and industry many times until I finished my PhD. Went to startups finally, so I appreciate the academic connection between industry and higher learning. So it's great to be here. And thank you, Jean-Paul and Baldo and Stefano for basically organizing. So I think we communicate with Jean-Paul over Skype, from San Francisco, and so this was a spontaneous idea because I'm here on a vacation essentially. So so I apologize if I forgot something because I had to escape from my children on the way here. I have 4 little kids, and so my days are spent worrying that they are not get lost and they don't fall into the canals and things like that. But so far it's going great, right? And so essentially, I love utilities. I kind of I stayed about 3 weeks in Venice. Nobody can believe this. This sounds crazy. What I'm doing there with 4 little children in the middle of a big stone city. But it's all the fun, and so I want to figure out, how community works, how IT works in Europe in general and in Italy specifically. So, I would like personally to stay longer because I want to learn Italian. I tried twice and I forgot all of it, but it's subconsciously somewhere there. So, but I figured the only way to properly learn it is to stay longer. So I started with 3 weeks and see how this goes. So this is supposed to be very informal. Don't have any slides. I didn't even take my computer with me because I knew I'm going to stay with kids. But I'd like to. So I like to ask questions, and respectively, if you guys feel like asking questions at any point, please interrupt me, raise your hand, and it's very informal. So I want to ask first of all to get to understand a little bit about the audience, right? So who here is a software engineer? Okay. Who is, let's say, a product manager? Are there any product managers? Who is a manager of some kind? Development manager. Okay. Who didn't raise their hand yet? A subset. So what are you guys?
Scientists.
Scientists. Okay. So who is an academic? Okay. So you're a different kind of scientist.
Yeah. Sysadmin.
Sysadmin. Okay. Who is a DevOps person? Who is doing system administration? Okay. Cool. So I think it's probably a similar mix to what we have in SF Scala, right? So I live in San Francisco area. All of the meetups we run in San Francisco, and SF Scala I founded Scala for Startups, which we merged with SF Scala. So now it's the biggest Scala meetup in the world. So I try to connect with Scala meetups and general software engineering meetups in various places. So when I worked for Nitro, which is a global company, it's Australia, San Francisco, and Dublin. So we started with Dublin Spark, and so it was very interesting to meet Scala and Spark developers in Dublin. And likewise, it's great to meet you guys. So I guess I wanted to so I like to connect communities and I like to connect topics. So I want to outline a few topics which I see becoming very interesting, very popular in the Scala community in the Bay Area. And also we're running this conference called Scalæ By the Bay, which is now in its 5th year. So I invite everybody to attend it. I know it's a long way, but the least we can do is to give you a very big discount for this, which I'll share with Gianpaolo. So now we're in the early bird for that, but it's in November. It's at Twitter headquarters. So I want to send you a specific discount, which is bigger than anything else we offer to the US because I know it's a long way. It's a long way to go, right? So we became pretty international. We had people from multiple European countries, from China, from Japan, from Argentina, so it becomes a pretty good developer conference. So probably what I'd like to share is a few topics why Scala becomes a very strong choice for developers and data scientists, and maybe understand how you guys are using Scala, right? And maybe find connections. So a little bit of history. So I started using Scala in 2009. So I was finishing my PhD in computer science, and my topic was essentially measuring influence on Twitter. And so I believe that I did the first PhD on finding influence on Twitter graph. So I was the first consumer of the streaming API which Twitter provided around that time. So essentially, you could have an HTTP connection and you would receive all the tweets as they come in. So in 2009, it was possible for a graduate student with a big computer to receive 10% of Twitter, which was called garden hose, basically in real time, right? So now it's not possible, but I was very proud of essentially being able to receive all the data myself. Because if I'm a graduate student, you cannot hire sysadmins. Right, you cannot hire assistants. There's a saying that in academia, I don't know if it's true in Italian. In American academia, there's a saying that the tree of science is hydrated with the blood of graduate students. Right, so this is what they say. Right, they do all the work. So essentially, I got a big Sun computer with 64 gigabytes of memory. In 2009, it was a big deal. And so I looked around and I tried. So I already was familiar with OCaml. So I worked at Amazon before that, and so I learned about OCaml, which was my first functional programming language. So I tried essentially, I knew that the PhD is the only time in my life that I have full freedom of selecting all the tools I like and play with them, right? Because in industry, if you go to industry, they'll tell you, why are you playing with those tools? It's time to do some work, right? Like there is stuff to be done. So I knew that this is essentially the only time when I can play with different things. So I decided I will implement the same algorithm for influence in different functional programming languages. So I knew already OCaml. I learned Clojure, I learned Scala, and I learned Haskell. And I implemented essentially the same algorithms which I developed in all of these languages. And so what I found that actually Scala, I learned about Scala because of Twitter itself, right? Because Twitter already made the choice of Scala independently because it was written in Ruby, right? And obviously, at some point it started breaking. So there was this famous story about the fail whale, right? When you could not load the tweets, you would see a picture of the whale. Who's seen a fail whale on Twitter here? Okay, so there are people who know. By the way, if I'm talking too fast, please interrupt me. Let me know. So basically, they switched to Scala, and one of the developers outside of Twitter provided an API to access timeline, personal tweets and garden holes, and so I found it. And then I realized I heard of Scala before somewhere. I heard the name, but I didn't look into it. And then I realized that this is interesting because it's a functional programming language, which essentially reminds me of OCaml, right? And I really like them out. It's very simple, it's very clean. But it's kind of real world, right? It's on JVM. And I knew that at some point I need to leave this wonderful world of academia, and I need to. So I decided to kind of be a little bit masochistic. I will inflict pain on myself on my own terms, right? Like I don't have a boss to tell me that I have to do it, so it will be at my own choosing, at my own pace. I can look at this stuff. So for some reason, I don't know why, I bought a book about Maven, and I read it, right? Which normal people never do, right? It's like a blob of XML, but I actually learned about it, and it was very interesting. The notion that you can publish its artifacts in a central repository, and then discover them, right? That's actually one of the strengths of JVM. I don't know other platform which lets you package, distribute, and discover artifacts as reliably as JVM does, right? So I kind of learned about Maven, and I found early plugins for Maven in Scala, which were maintained by Josh Ref, who went, to TypeSafe and back to Google now. And so I kind of discovered different things, and so I found that this Scala hits a specific sweet spot, right? Because on the one hand, it lets people inclined towards functional programming to basically practice it on the JVM. On the other hand, it's real enough so you can integrate with the Java system. But at that point, I was not actually a Java developer. So I only learned Java. So in graduate school, in my own CS curriculum, we had to take the first course where they taught Java and a map, which I think is the best way to do it. Actually, they start with a map. I wonder, do you guys teach? You teach a map. Do you start with map? Is it the first language people learn?
Yes, the first language.
The first language. This is great. And so I think.
That's because I have students from different schools, from technical schools. They know C, C++, and I have students from other schools which they do not study computer science. And so I started with ML, pure functional programming. In fact, F sharp. I started with F sharp.
Yeah.
Pure functional programming, and I like a lot. I think it's a good choice. I would like to move to Scala.
I mean, ML is a great choice too, right? But Scala gives you immediate continuity, right? But I found personally that it was a perfect choice. And I think actually people who learn C already, it may be more difficult for them, right? Like if you've never seen functional programming, you will be exposed, like you will think this is normal. Unfortunately, everything else will be downhill, right? So because it will not be as beautiful if you work in industry, but it will give you the mindset. So yeah, I think Scala gives you basically that clarity of thought, and also it gives you immediately this connection. So I had to learn all the Java tools, right? Because I was never a production programmer in Java. But it was not difficult, right? Because essentially, the only thing everybody uses now is IntelliJ, right? So I'm actually curious who uses IntelliJ IDEA as the IDE. Okay, and who uses Eclipse, for instance, and who uses something else. So what do you guys use?
NetBeans.
Okay, anybody uses Sublime or Atom? So I think Atom is becoming for some reason popular because it's fast and there is an unsigned plugin for this. Sublime is supported as well. So essentially, so I picked Scala, and then it was not actually. It was interesting. So Scala was not the final choice for my PhD because I was basically one guy with one big machine. The main thing I need to do, I want to go home at the end of the day. Right, so I needed to serialize. So I built this big graph in memory, which was basically a series of maps. Right, so it's kind of so it was a nested maps, and I implemented them in different languages. And Haskell was actually interesting because I kind of beat everybody by speed, and I kind of teased the Haskell people that Haskell is slower than a camel, and then Haskell people started to improve. So they essentially removed all the laziness from the map. They gave me a version of the maps. Basically, they removed everything from Haskell, which is different from a camel, and then they beat a camel. But in the run-up to this, we found a garbage collection error. So Haskell garbage collector had integer overflow problem. When processing my graph about 100 million tweets, which was not much, right? But it turned out that Haskell was never tested at the size of 100 million tweets, right? And so basically, its garbage collector, got an overflow. So I had to work with Simon Marlowe, who was at GHC team in Microsoft, and so we had to rent the Amazon machine and upload the GHC there, and he found the error. He also wanted to go home for the day, so he asked me to shut it down because he spent his own $5 for the Amazon machine or something. So that was around that time. So I figured that Haskell was never actually tested at the time for big data. Well, Camel worked beautifully, and it could serialize this graph into disk in about a minute or two, which was great. And so JVM serialization was horrible. Right, essentially, if I wanted to serialize a big in-memory structure, which was essentially, maybe 40 gigabytes or so, right? Basically, I wanted to fill up as much memory as I can. I just couldn't do it at that time, right? And since then, there was a lot of progress, but it kind of hinted that there are certain bottlenecks for JVM. And then I went to the startup world of San Francisco, right? So I finished my PhD, and the plan was always, right, to go there. And my first startup had Ruby as the platform. And so the team was amazing. The team was made of ex-Googlers, and they took a very serious approach. So they at that time, 2011, test-driven development was fairly new. And so these people essentially decided, let's do completely test-driven development. So out of 5 working days, they spent 3 days writing tests. And then they spent 2 days writing actual code. And so they ended up with about 30,000 tests in Ruby, which executed for about half an hour. And essentially, the test tested everything which Ruby allows, right? So do you have the right number of function parameters? Do you have the right number of function types? So basically tested things which should be tested by the compiler in a strongly typed language, right? But on the other hand, you could easily mock. You could easily mock databases, right? You can do monkey patching. You could essentially do everything. So the testing consists of very clever mocking of things which are should be given. And so the art of this testing was essentially to do very granular test in each case, right? So basically, and so these people got very good at isolating individual properties. So in the end, the system was maintainable. It was very well done, but they ended up essentially spending several years writing Ruby and testing for basic things which should be there. So I immediately felt very lonely at that place, in the sense that I knew Ruby, I liked Ruby. I learned it first at Amazon. It was new. Active Record was a very new thing. But I didn't feel that that's essentially what I want to do. So I started looking around, and basically, I thought, is there a Scala meetup? And the 2 meetups which existed in the Bay Area at the time, for some reason, were dormant, so they did not have current, next meetings. So I thought I'd start a new one, and I started a meetup called Scala for Startups. And essentially, the point was startups are small groups of people, which there is a shortage of resources. You have to do everything, right? You have to do DevOps, you have to do coding, you have to do testing, right, and planning, and so forth. So, and my feeling was that functional programming gives you more ability for less effort, right? Basically, if you're a small team, I immediately thought that this is the right thing to do, to use pitfalls and a lot of time spent kind of rectifying problems, right? And so let's avoid the problems altogether. And so the first meetup we had about, smaller than this group, we had about 20, 25 people, which are sat in a big circle. And I think we didn't ever get beyond the introductions, because I wanted to kind of learn about every person there, and we gave them 1 minute each. So went around the room, and then at some point, basically, we hit like half of the circle. The person there expressed very strong views, and then the person at the beginning contradicted the other person, and then they started arguing. And so, it was clear that we have some interesting features of functional programmers here, because they hold very strong views about development. I think maybe stronger than others, right? Because in order to survive as a functional programmer, at that time, you had to be very strongly resolved that you're going to work in this mindset, right? You're not going to succumb to kind of what other people tell you. So we had actually many people. The guy who had very strong opinions, he was a founder of a startup which used Scala to control machinery. And I think the idea was that there are factories where you have very expensive machines worth millions of dollars. So he was basically doing predictive analytics before it was called predictive maintenance, right? So he was receiving all the data, telemetry from these machines. He was using Scala to predict when the machine is going to fail. And so at that time it was very new. And so this guy was a pioneer. So in March I was at Bosch Connected World conference in Berlin. So predictive maintenance was one of the phrases catch in the sea of German, right? Like you can see predictive analytics, predictive maintenance, artificial intelligence. These phrases you can, right? They're basically idioms now, right? But I mean, at the time it was very new, so that was another interesting feature that we had a lot of pioneers who were doing things which at that time were not mainstream, right? So I think that's kind of another interesting feature of Scala community, that a lot of people who are attracted to it, they kind of see the trends, and usually these trends tend to work, right? So basically from my first startup, I moved to my next one, which was called Cloud with a K, and that was a company which basically gave you a score, a ranking score, and the only thing about influence there we knew is Justin Bieber is #1. So basically, and my algorithm discovered Justin Bieber before. So I claim that I discovered Justin Bieber for adults. No adults knew about Justin Bieber. Only teenage girls from about 12 to 15 years old, even younger. And so I knew about the Justin Bieber, and Cloud confirmed that, right? So they had this very complex ranking, which always said that Justin Bieber is #1, Lady Gaga is #2, and Barack Obama is like 100. And Warren Buffett is not even there because he's not on Twitter, right? So it was called Warren Buffett problem. So that we cannot give Warren Buffett influence ranking above Justin Bieber because we don't have any data. So one of the tasks which I was asked to do, and other people on the team, is how do we make sure that Barack Obama has a high cloud score than Justin Bieber. So we solved this, right? So that essentially was kind of the first real world usage of Scala, which I participated in, and I think it came very naturally from Hadoop world, right? So Cloud started I think in 2008, Twitter started in 2006. So Cloud went through a bunch of iterations. The founder did some Excel spreadsheets, and he kind of he had his own idea. Then as the data grew, they chose Hadoop. And so basically they had HDFS, right? So I think that at that time, every big data use case started with HDFS being a dumping ground for a bunch of data. And the data is usually web logs or results of control, right? And so you essentially have this big gigantic mass grave of text. And so they ran a bunch of Hadoop jobs in Java, and it was becoming boring, right, and unwieldy, right? Because they had Hive. Right? Obviously, you have to ask a question on Hive, and then you have to wait for a minute. So who is using, by the way, who's using Hive here? Oh, Hadoop. Okay. Who's using HDFS to store things? Okay. So it was coming from functional programming. It was extremely boring, and it was also very slow. So I looked around. Is there anything, not to use this stuff, right? And then I found Spark. So in 2012, Matei Zacharie was still a graduate student at Berkeley, and so fortunately, Berkeley is next to San Francisco. So I just tried Spark, right? I downloaded it, and so we had Amazon, and so it basically was made to run on Amazon. Who's using Amazon? Who's using Amazon Web Services? I've seen somebody with a T-shirt. So that's a standard selection for startups, right? Because they don't have infrastructure. So Cloud had Amazon. It had its own data center. So the Amazon was not the primary thing. It was something we tried. So basically, I had my own little cluster, and I deployed Spark there, and then I uploaded a bunch of tweets to S3, which was there, and then I tried to read them into Spark, and then nothing happened. Because apparently it was some kind of failure. So I asked Matei to help me out, and I met with him over some cup of coffee, and he was very nice to come like 9 p.m. to some coffee shop in Berkeley. And so it turned out that the timeouts on S3 were not properly configured. So I was getting timeouts. So I just had to, because Berkeley had a much faster connection than Cloud. So so I could read S3 from my own data center. But then we fixed it properly, and I could load the tweets, I could do the computations, and it was beautiful, right? Essentially, you had your own little prompt. So So I was having my interactive environment, and I could play with the data. So essentially, that's kind of the mode I discovered working with OCaml and Haskell and Scala enclosure, right? You have the prompts, you can basically load everything into memory as data structures, and then you can inspect the data structures, right? So essentially, my whole mode preparation was to do that, and so I wanted this for the bigger data, and Spark gave me exactly this. So I realized that this is actually perfect, right? Because in Scala you can show data structures very nicely, right? You can have maps, essentially you can have lists, and you generally don't need anything else, right? You can have your own types, but essentially for data work, this general ideas will suffice, and you can print them, right? And you can iterate. So I became a big proponent of Spark in 2012. And it was very interesting to remember that most people 5 years ago did not believe Spark is going anywhere in Scala. They thought this is very niche, this is very academic, esoteric, very mind-boggling, very nerdy, we don't need this stuff. So we have Java is fast, Java is great, and so I talked to people in LabR, for instance, and I will not name names, but like famous people who now are all for Spark. They always were for Spark, they're Spark pioneers, they believed in Spark from the beginning. At that time they told me, no, we don't need Spark, Spark is slow, we don't need Scala, Scala is slow, we don't need any of this stuff. So, and I immediately thought this is actually going to work, right? And I think the reason to me that it actually did work is that a lot of people who came to data work, right, data science happened in Bay Area. I think about 2015 we started to see. By the way, how many people here would say they're data scientists? So is data science a job in Italy? Like, can you hire? Are you hiring data scientists? Are they called like analysts or data science? Is data science an actual term people use?
No, it's different fields they come from. So maybe physics, mathematics, stuff like this.
But they use the term data science.
They use the term data science even if they don't have maybe the experience of a data science.
Right.
What should be a data science?
Right. So in I think in Bay Area it's become a very fashionable term. It's a hype term, right? So basically what happens? Everybody wants to be a data scientist because it pays a lot of money. And Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Amazon will all hire you because you're a data scientist. So they basically started. There is a whole bunch of boot camps. They make data scientists in 12 weeks from nothing, right? So which is great because there is a lot of people who used to be product managers and designers and studied literature and philosophy, but they have good quantitative skills. So I think the majority of people in startups actually are not coding, right? They're just waiting for coders to code. They're sitting around and waiting for these guys to do something and to finish up coding. Meanwhile, they sell things, they design things, they plan things, right? They do like a lot of plans. So a lot of these people, I think, they realize like they want really to actually get their hands dirty. And so data science became a gateway because coding is mysterious, but data is it relates to some real world phenomena. You measure users, you measure user engagement, you measure views, right? So a lot of people went into data science because it gave, I think, an alternative way to get into startups. And so I think what happened is something very unfortunate for us, that they all settled on Python. So 95% of data scientists I know, they all study Python. And my own thoughts about it is it's because Python is basically a non-language. So it's as close as non-language as you can imagine, right? It's essentially, it's almost like Fortran, right? Like in Fortran, you have for loop and you have a do loop and you have an if statement, and that's it, and you have a goto. So in Python, you have a little bit more, right? You have no objects. But essentially, there's a choice that you need to make a data scientist from zero to hero in 12 weeks, right? You have to teach them k-means, clustering, regression. You have to teach them basic concepts of data science. You cannot possibly teach them software engineering at the same time, right? Because you need to teach them about types and modularity and continuous deployment and test-driven development. So this becomes a very tough choice, and always software engineering basically is moved to the side, right? And so they come out basically knowing basic notions of data science, but they generally are not familiar with software engineering. So, and kind of the key point I want to convey is that it provides a tremendous opportunity for all the software engineers in the room, whom I thought there are a majority here, right? So, because essentially, so it's my proposition that it's much harder to learn software engineering properly than to learn basic data science in 12 weeks, right? Because, again, personal, it's my personal view. Machine learning is basically a very simple thing. It's regression. It's just fitting a function to a set of points, right? So it's mystified, but deep learning became very mysterious and very widespread, and there is a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt about what it is. But essentially, all machine learning does, right? You have a set of data points and you have to model it. So normally regression works, perfectly in real world. You generally don't need deep learning for majority of use cases. So essentially, the basic preparation of a data scientist is very similar to a math course. In the university, if you took enough math, if you have basic concepts, you can probably learn it in a semester. You can solve some problems, right? And you probably can then work if you have to learn R or something else, it's a bit harder. But the basic concepts to me are very simple, right? So, but software engineering, on the other hand, it's somewhat of an art, right? So, the Knuth's work is called The Art of Computer Programming. So I think in a way, software engineering is not it's not learned the same way as you learn math, right? It's basically, software engineering is practiced in industry, right? It's a set of skills which you basically learn, you go to war, right? You stay late and stuff fails, and you need to fix it, right? And it failed because of some interesting things you didn't think about, right? So it's a very experiential loop, which you have to really experience, right? And so it's in a way it is also an apprenticeship, because for some reason the best software engineers come from Google or Amazon or Microsoft, right? So in a way they learn from others, but they don't learn from others directly. Sometimes you read blogs, right? And you do a lot of reading. You kind of exist in a group which holds itself to high standard, right? So I think there are basic things which are more indicative of a culture. So because there is certain expectation, right? That you literally see, like, this is unacceptable. This is like very bad code. This is crappy job, So people have certain expectations what constitutes an appropriate culture of software engineering. And then I think what happened in the Bay Area that companies which were successful, they kind of spawned these people out, right? The people left from Google and from Amazon and from Microsoft, and they started startups. So they took capital with them, but also they took knowledge. And so somehow this culture exists. And so I think in a way, if you look at Scala, so Martin Dursky worked at Sun. He had a hand in creating Java generics, right? So in a way, if you think how this happened, it's a crystallized experience. So programming language, in a way, crystallizes a lot of experience which accumulated in real use cases, because generics accumulated in removing redundancy, right? Like you had to specialize some code for one type, another type, next type. So you thought of a mechanism. How do you abstract this? And I think the reason why it's important, because developers in production code base, they don't want to fix multiple bugs in multiple places. It's very important to have your code base maintained as your key intellectual property, right? So like, if you look at every good company, its code base is its treasure, its main treasure. They are very specific about updates. They have pull requests, they have code reviews. So smart companies are very careful about their code base, right? And if you have a code base, you want really to have it as small as possible, right? Because you don't want to have redundancy. So I think that kind of the feature that functional programming is concise comes probably directly from production experience. You want to have as small code base as possible. So if you have bugs, you want to eliminate them in one place and not other places, right? I think immutability. If you look at immutability, it's another I think feature which is actually extremely important in production, right? Because you don't need to mentally keep track of the state, right? If you need to understand, if you look at the variable and you wonder what its value is, then you need to think what it was before, right? And then you basically need to mentally track all the steps of your program. So if you remove this completely, you know this is an immutable name bound to a value, then you remove this whole other complexity, right? And it's much easier to debug it under fire, right? If something fails, it's much easier generally to do this. So I think that this is why software engineering, in my mind, is harder to achieve high proficiency in, because you need to live through this series of experiences. So this is why JavaScript and Python bother me tremendously, because people who use them, they're removed from. Then it's the next step of removal from the computers, right? Because people my generation usually learn Fortran and C, right? So we know how hardware works. So then next generation works with Java, so it's already a virtual machine. Then you have JavaScript, which basically lives in the browser, so you don't even know what is it connected to, right? And so you don't have feelings for performance, or right? It's much harder. So with data science, generally, you need to know about performance, but if you do it in Python, it means there is a barrier that some production system produces the data, then the data is given to you on a plate, right, or somehow delivered to you. And so the data scientist essentially plays with this data somehow, figures out what's going on, and then they throw it over the fence and they give it to production engineers to do something with this again, right? So I think if majority of data scientists are using Python right now, it creates a huge opportunity for Scala people, right? Because it's much easier to implement. I mean, there is a lot of libraries to implement basic data science algorithms in Java or Scala, right? So if you have a data pipeline, if you have an API, which works with users, right, you can directly process this data. Also, streaming is becoming widespread, right? So there are systems like Kafka, there are Akka streams, so there's Flink. So you expect data basically to flow through the systems. I think it's much harder to understand properly how reactive streams work than some basic algorithms in data science. So, but if you know how to work with the systems, I think personally it's much easier to plug in your data science algorithm in the middle of this, right? So I think that as everything becomes artificial intelligence, right? It's like next door for data science. It's no longer cool to say data science. That's it. It's done, right? It's like it used to be machine learning, then data science and data mining for that, but now that's it. Artificial intelligence subsumes everything, right? So essentially, we all serve the next system, which is artificial intelligence. So anything you do with data enables this giant AI system, right, which will basically replace everything. And so I think every enterprise kind of is switching to the mode where you feed the AI as it's being built, right? So as everything switches to AI, I think data engineer becomes a key person in the organization, because I think at this point most people understand that AI without data means nothing, right? You have to have the data. So if you go and you want to get funding for an AI company, they ask, where are you going to get the training data? Do you have labeled data? How do you know which set of examples is what you want versus those you don't want, right? So data engineers will have to pump all this data to the AI, and I don't think there is anybody else better positioned to do this than Scala engineers, right? Because we can build APIs, right? We have some of the best APIs in the world, right? So Akka and Play are used for APIs for many years. We have Kafka is written in Scala, right? We have the message bus to basically connect all the systems to each other. We have Spark, which is a compute engine, right? So you can load everything into Spark. You can process all the data. I think 80% of use of Spark is ETL, right? So basically, it's a dirty secret of Spark. People are not using it for machine learning. They just use it to extract fields from JSON. That's it, right? That's like it's a big, gigantic JSON extractor, or even worse, like CSV, right? Something else, right? So it's super easy. Like load everything into Spark, extract the field, dump it into a big text file and shut up. That's it, right? And then you can do something with this text file. You can load another Spark job with this. And a lot of companies start like this, right? They basically have this, elastic MapReduce job on Amazon. They load, they spin up a gigantic Spark cluster. They load all the data into this cluster. They process, extract some data and then dump it. So we have that, right? So I think obviously, if you come from Scala background, it's much easier to do this in Scala. It's much faster, and of course, it's much safer than to do it in Python. Because if you have one typo in the Python script and you load it on Spark, what happens? Let's say you have 1,000 nodes and you have a typo in the Python script and you use PySpark. You will have 1,000 failures, right? I mean, it will just replicate the failure, right? Because it's a dumb thing to do. It will just, it's a parallelization engine. It will distribute your Python code to 1,000 nodes, and then it will run it there. And every node, with surprise, will realize it's a bug, right? But they will do it. So Scala will not even let you ship this code, compile it, and ship it to the cluster. So essentially, in my mind, PySpark is a machine to amplify your typos on a cluster. All right. So I think it's even more important once we have distributed systems to use strongly typed languages. So basically, in my mind, we have all these advantages, right? So we have strong type systems to check the code before we distribute it. We can connect directly to the existing data pipelines, and there is sufficient amount of machine learning libraries in Java and Scala to do most of the work, right? So I think the gaps are, deep learning is very popular, so we have TensorFlow as the #1 library. We have a MaxNet, but basically they implement in C and C++. They have a Python wrapper, right? They have a Python API, so it's became essentially a social artifact that people use deep learning from Python because it became a widespread use case where you call into the low-level systems from Python, but nothing prevents you from doing it from Scala. So there's a Scala API for a MaxNet, right? And so there's deep learning for J, which works as a backend for Keras. So I think, in my opinion, Python is very strong right now as a vehicle for data science in general. But as people learn it, they will want more, right? They will want more performance. They will want more type safety, especially enterprise level type safety. And I think in a few years, we'll probably see Scala and Rust and other languages, strongly typed languages, catch up in the space of data science. So basically, that's kind of some of the themes I see in my community. So I don't know. I think it was a lot. So I don't know if you guys have questions so far. Happy to make it a conversation maybe. So if you have any questions, please. So you need libraries, right? So deep learning for J is the strongest deep learning library in Scala in Java, and they support GPUs. And so, basically you support NVIDIA, right? Because NVIDIA has closed source, right, thing which you need to work with. But Scala, so deep learning for J supports it very well. And so it's a company called SkyMind, which supports deep learning for J. They work with smart cities in China and Japan and Korea. So they have production customers. So there is a very strong use case. If you need deep learning on the JVM, you can look at deep learning for J. It's recommended at kind of industrial level library, and it supports everything about GPUs.
So what happens if you have data scientists and they work on Python?
Being able to do everything in Scala and kind of to emphasize that Python kind of misses all the points. But it's very typical that you have people who come into data science through Python. So the reality is that if you have somebody doing data science, they're probably not a functional programmer, maybe they're not a programmer. I mean, then they come from statistics or analytics and they know R, for instance, right? So it's perfect. Like if you know R, you probably are a statistician if you know it well, right? So I think there is a lot of organizations which essentially surround data scientists with like a wall, essentially. So they sit in this walled garden. They can go crazy there. They can do whatever they want, right? They interface with data. They can read it from PySpark, right? And then they can push it somewhere. But usually, if they develop a model, so they can essentially model the data, right? And they have the model. Obviously, the model which they develop in PySpark will be compatible with production, right? So and then you deploy this model and then you apply it. So usually it never happens that you do it in real time, right? Because there is some testing. So it's up to your process. But I noticed that organizations which are most scalable, they try to isolate this kind of use case, right? So they have strongly typed data pipelines before and after, and also they have some process, right? So they have some regressions. They receive the model from data scientists, and then they have tests. So basically you need to test data science, and this is I think the beautiful thing about Scala experience, right? So we take test-driven development for granted, right? We kind of know we need to write tests. So who here doesn't write tests? Okay, nobody says they don't write tests. Right? At least nobody admits this, right? But I think this is very, very interesting. So if you look at what we learn in software engineering, that we all agree that writing tests is good. If you look at data science, there is no established process there. They all talk about an algorithm, but nobody talks about what happens after that, right? So what if you have two versions of the algorithm? Generally, data science books don't talk about it. How do you know that your improved algorithm is actually better, right? So they're not used to establishing a process, right? It's because it's more theoretical. So the idea that let's say you have two models and you have two kind of sample sets of data, and your next model is better. Basically, you need to formalize what does it mean for one to be better than the other, and it's still to perform as well as the first one. You can. It's for many data scientists, it's not easy, right, to think about it, and then they have to use Jenkins or something like that. Like they have no idea usually what it is. Right? Like, a lot of software engineers don't know what it is. It's a DevOps guy who is doing this, right? So a lot of this stuff is hard to operate, but let's say, if you're a small startup and you have very good engineers, like, 2, 3, 4 people can actually operate the whole thing, right? Like, you can maintain Jenkins and you can have production and development environment, right? You can have tests, and so it's a proven fact of life that you can have a very small startup with very good people which will do all of this stuff. So in my mind, if you apply this to data science, you have a tremendous advantage, right? Because your data will be tested, your models will be tested. You will not lose money because you did not screw up in production. You will retain the customers. You will do a better job. So I don't actually see that's happening much, right? People at the stage right now when they discover data science, they think it's a separate thing from software engineering. So these two cultures did not yet intermingle. And I think what will happen is it's much easier for a software engineer to learn a few algorithms, so pick them from the shelf, because there is already good libraries. Because the majority of use cases, you don't need to be, to win a Nobel Prize in deep learning, right? You don't need to advance deep learning itself. You will be able to take, approved library and use it. But I think it will be much easier for somebody with good software engineering background to do that than do the other thing. Except like a big question which I have for the future is whether basically everything will be on Google or Azure, right? If everything becomes platform, then basically we'll just drop things into Google and they will come back, right? So if you use Dataflow with TensorFlow and you use BigQuery and all the Google tools, it will probably look a little bit different, but it will still be software engineering, right? Because I think the art of kind of maintenance of a software system is much trickier, right? It's like it's a living organism. And functional programming creates a set of practices around it, which makes it easier, right? It makes it easier in each kind of as a code, but it also makes it easier as a process, right? So I think if your whole company subscribes to this idea, I think that it will be much stronger, much easier. So I'm personally waiting for a DevOps system in Scala to appear, because I'm very frustrated that all the DevOps systems which we have are written in blobs of Ruby or Python, right? Right. So I mean, there's Salt Stack is written in Python, which is good. But Chef and Puppet are Ruby, right? So it's very interesting to me that that we didn't see yet the functional programming language used for DevOps, because like we entrust our code and data to a blob of Ruby to run it.
Why DevOps should start looking at Scala rather than Python? Because it's just trying to make scripting activities rather than pure programming. So which would be the advantage for DevOps to embrace Scala rather than Python?
So I think it's the same thing, right? So the infrastructure as code is now widespread notion, right? So essentially, the best organizations want to basically write code instead of spinning machines. So your DevOps is actually coding, right? So it looks a little bit different, right? So if you look at what happens in DevOps, right? So I'm very kind of interested in DevOps. I like to have full control from the metal up. So when I was a founder of a startup, I created the DevOps team and also the Scala team, and I looked at different tools. I looked at different functional programming tools. There was a Clojure-based tool to do some DevOps, but it never became widespread, right? So I think let's say you have a typical web server, right? So like you have a small startup, so it will run on four web servers. Let's say it's sufficient. You have redundancy. Like you have a load balancer or HA proxy. You bring up several nodes. You have a MySQL database, right? And you have several web servers. So it's a very typical thing. So even at that level, let's say you want to stand it up. So you need to launch, let's say you want to do a test environment. So you need to bring up several web servers because you want to see what happens if session starts on one machine and connects to the other, right? So then you have MySQL, maybe you have Redis, and you have HA proxy to load balance it, right? So that's what I had in my previous, startup, and so this already actually is a bunch of machines because each of these things has a configuration. So you need to bring up a web server. It has a configuration. MySQL has configuration. HA proxy has configuration, and then you need to test it somehow. So essentially, it's so you can write some Python there and it will do it, but the same problems will occur because if you have a typo now your machine will not connect to HA proxy, right? Or your MySQL will not work. So the cost of error is even higher. Also, if you bring up a machine on Amazon, it takes a minute or more, right? So you waste a lot of time. So basically, we hired a guy who knew DevOps well, but not Python. So he learned Python on the job, so he cost us a lot of money because he made a typo in Python and he does figure it out, and like several hours can pass, right? So I think the cost is actually higher. So if you use functional programming for DevOps, your scripts will do better, right? And so if you can formalize what do you want from DevOps, like I want this machine to connect to that machine. It's a perfect question for types. Like what do you want from that machine? I want it to connect to a service. Service should run on a port, right? So you can test all of this stuff, right? You can actually specify DSL. And so if you look at DevOps systems, that's exactly what they do. They have a DSL, but they don't, I think they live in Middle Ages. They didn't think of this as a DSL, right? Like they kind of stumble upon some notions of a DSL, but they try to speak in this primordial language, right? And so if you know abstractions, you can actually, right? You can come from a different angle and say, like, you want to express this set of properties, right? So in my mind, it's very interesting that we don't see yet, right, a system for DevOps in functional programming. Probably because functional programming don't want to do this, right? Like
is a little tool coming from Monsanto Enterprise that is written in Scala and wrap the language of configuration of Amazon AWS.
Interesting.
Yes, it's a good tool, but is long.
Do you know what the name was?
I don't remember. If I start the internet, I can.
Maybe you can post it as a comment to the meetup.
Okay. Yeah.
So that would be great to learn. But, so like I know kind of subsets, right? I know different kind of tools in Scala which do different pieces of DevOps. And obviously emanate by how you use a scripting and Scala, right? So I think we have very, very strong scripting. So I think it's a no-brainer to use emanate for DevOps, right? Because you can have things at the prompt you can test. You can do everything in the shell you want to do now from Scala, right? So I think we actually have very strong advance towards this, right? So like if I would be running startup right now, I would use emanate and I would try to basically avoid scripting bash, because bash scripts are ad hoc, right? Like everywhere you can use a bash script, you can now use emanate. So that's what I would personally try to do, right? And I would just stay in Scala to do that. By the way, I forgot to ask, how many people here work in startups? In startups versus big companies. You can, let's say, startup can be a consulting company, right? Like company with under 20 employees. Under 20. How about under 50? So, am I assuming everybody else is like above 100? So you all guys work for big companies. What are the main employers of Scala people here? So, like, do you know like which subset of people here comes from the same company, which is the biggest subset? Who is like which is?
I think we have a kind of 80 people, but we are a very big company. We are above 8,000 people.
Okay.
So 80 people is not that much, but anyway, in Italy it's
no, it is a lot. 80 developers. It's like, yeah, normally that's one of the biggest groups you have. It's about the same size. So yeah, so basically I think that's another thing, right? Like, in the Bay Area, startups are a majority of community members, right? So in San Francisco, in extended Bay Area, South Bay, we have Googles and Facebooks and bigger companies, LinkedIn, right? So that's a very similar setup. But in a startup, you have to be very agile. So I noticed that a lot of people in our groups come from startups, and they figure out they need all of this safety, they need all of this amplification, right, to do more with less. But I think it applies across the enterprise. It applies in a group, in the side of a big company, right? Because you can be like a group of rebels, like you can build your own stuff, which is better. I don't know how it works in Italy, right? But like in the US, it's not easy. But people, right? Like you can pick technology, you can run with this, you can prove this works better, and then you can take over the rest of the company. Just if you believe in yourself. Any other questions?
But do you find it easy to hire people working on such programming languages, so developers basically on big data tools and stuff? Because we find much easier to find data scientists or people that want to become a data scientist.
Yes.
And it's very hard to hire in Italy.
I think it's the same. It applies the same. Basically, it's war in the area. It's war for talent, right? So basically, if you're a Scala programmer, you can get a job tomorrow. Like if you personally, like if you want to come to the Bay Area and find a job, that just ping me, ask Jean-Paul to my contact. If you're a good Scala programmer, I promise you'll get the job like in a week, right? Because it's super easy. It's ridiculously easy. Essentially, it's a big hunt. So if you're a Scala programmer, you just basically need to come to the public square and say, I'm a Scala programmer, right? And you'll be inundated with job offers. And so some people say that Scala slowed down, and as a community organizer, I can say that every year we have more companies at Scalæ By the Bay. So for instance, Apple is now the top sponsor of this year for the first time. So Apple selling, as a top sponsor, they got, I forgot, 20, 30 buses, and they told me immediately, like they run out of these buses. They need to sell more. So because, Apple Maps is using Scala, Siri people look at it, right? So there is a huge amount of data scientists inside of Apple who, they build systems for data scientists using Scala and Spark, right? So this is news. I knew about it, but it comes, to the next level. Twilio, LinkedIn is a user, Twitter is the host, and we have lots and lots of companies. So the number of companies I see every year is increasing. A lot of startups now pick Scala. So financial technologies is actually, they figure out that it's very good for them because, banks work on JVM. So it's kind of enterprisey enough, but it's fun enough, right? So it's kind of a sweet spot. So fintech companies pick Scala. Any big data company which used Hadoop wants to do Spark now, right? And Spark is Scala. So I think what happens is there is sufficient amount of people who kind of learn Scala, but you can repurpose, your own existing developers. So what happens, I think Ruby developers or Python Clojure developers are very good. So like entrenched, like people with 20 years of Java actually are harder to repurpose for Scala, but you can retrain, right? I mean, if they're good, there are obviously specific cases, right? So if people are familiar with the Java toolchain, and they're curious and they're intellectually agile, then you can retrain them, right? So companies sometimes basically invite, some very good trainer from Lightband, TypeSafe, right? When they used to do this, but essentially you can, like my personal approach would be to bring in a very good, like you have to have one person. Like if you can hire one very good Scala person who can teach, right? Like I would personally ask the organizers of this meetup, right? The guys are probably very good at teaching Scala, right? Like invite one of these guys, they'll teach all your whole team Scala, right? That's how it works. Generally, there is a lot of good remote people, right? Like sometimes you can work with remotes, and then you can learn, like teach your local team, and there's tons and tons of remote teams which are excellent, right? And in Europe, like there's, for some reason, Poland has strong Scala culture. Like there's many Polish developers, excellent teams. It's a counter of Scala. It's they have amazing like Scalæ software mill, right? These guys, like really they do a lot. They do a lot of contracts in the area, right? So like I hear of many startups who ask them, but then it becomes interconnected because you come to the meetup, you learn, right? So I would say just send your whole team to Scala Lagoon, right, and make them working, right? This is free learning, guys. This is amazing, right? Like this is, and the people actually who want to learn are the best Scala developers because it's a key feature. People who want to learn. I would say that's actually a very common characteristic.
If I remember correctly, last year the news came out of LinkedIn is slowly dismissing its Scala code base to Java 8+. So, your opinion about this news? Why a big company, which is a pioneer in Scala, is dismissing now its code base to an old language?
Right. So I know some people from LinkedIn. I'm not, closely familiar with this specific decision, but in my mind, it's a bureaucratic decision, not technical, right? So because basically it's if you have a giant company, right, you basically have more bureaucratic issues of control, and kind of I think it used to be the case, like in a big company, right? If you have like a small Scala team and a bigger Java-based company, you are perceived like these super smart people who kind of stand out, right? And so there are several cases I know, like a team at Netflix which left, right? So and this is a similar structure because in LinkedIn, it's a huge company. There are multiple divisions, and I think in that particular case, one of the top engineering guys basically decided that this is how they want to standardize, and that's his specific management experience and decision, right? Which I don't think it was based on technical choices. But if you look at, for instance, so some of the people who did Scala at LinkedIn, so Vitaly Gordon, he was a product manager at LinkedIn, and he was a speaker at Scala meetups. So now he's VP of Data Science and Engineering at Salesforce. Salesforce is a major supporter of Scala by the Bay. Salesforce, Einstein built a huge team using Scala and Spark. So a lot of LinkedIn people went to Salesforce, right? So I know multiple people there. So I think you have basically cases of corporate dynamics. So at some point at Twitter, there was an engineering VP who didn't want to use Scala and who was trying to figure out, because there's a constant tension. I think the question is valid. It's much easier to hire a bunch of Java developers, right? So it's also always very tempting to say we have a bunch of Java and we have a bunch of Scala, and these Scala people are weird, you know, and and so like they don't do what they tell them right away. They figure out something smarter, right? So I think from management standpoint, it's tempting to standardize in Java and say if you guys don't know the Java, you can go somewhere else, right? It's a natural. It's a right. So I would say it's a dynamic of a big company. Again, I don't know. I know LinkedIn has excellent culture. I know VP of engineering of LinkedIn. So it comes down to specific use cases. So I don't think it's a technical decision. It's because we see at Salesforce a huge group was built, right? And Salesforce is as hard to kind of has a big challenge in the real world as LinkedIn, right? So I would say there are different use cases, and I would not take it as as any kind of sign of Scala decline, because LinkedIn can make a decision. Again, I don't know much about it, right? I don't think Scala is not used in LinkedIn. I don't think that's phased out. There is a huge amount of systems written in Scala which are still on LinkedIn. So, for instance, Play. Some of the top users of Play was for the LinkedIn homepage. They implemented asynchronous loading of the homepage in Play. So I don't know if that's still in Scala or not, but basically they did a lot of investment. I don't think it's it's like a simple switch. Thanks.
Thank you very much.